I'm well aware that temporary restraining order that Kyroots got against me making any comments is in effect. But I cannot resist one of the last ones that was just read regarding the old man telling the kid originally that he should be careful if he ever discovers that 2 and 2 is 4, and he makes the discovery under duress. And if you recall, the kind of epilogue was some 20 years later, he sends him a card saying, hey, all secondary discoveries are made under duress. May I assume that all of you can take, or did take, the word duress into its widest, most expansive realms? Because everything in the secondary world, the whole operational aspect of the mind is under duress. You just don't think about it. If you're sane, you're operating under duress. If you're sane by anybody's definition. God, no. Well, I guess enough of you laugh that you do realize what I'm saying. Everything that is done that operates on the basis of the collective thought, the collective wisdom, the operations of the human mind that at any particular time is accepted and is operational as being valid, true, etc., is under duress. If any of you who did not chuckle along, for I guess for whatever reason you're probably sick and you weren't that weird when you were a teenager and in college, the rest of you, some of the ones that laughed, I could just picture you immediately. Is out there trying your damnedest to be weird. But those of you who didn't go through that, if you'd like to relive some of that past, all you've got to do is just walk right out there in the street, just go hang around the mall somewhere, and, shall we say, be acting extremely unusual. And you'll find out perhaps a more pregnant definition of the word duress. And so I was just going to suggest that what the old man, Kyroots just picked out an obvious one, because you would say that 2 and 2 and 4 has got to be some kind of crucible to ask someone, do you believe that 2 and 2 is 4? And it would be an absolute test at the ordinary level as to whether somebody's sane. Not just intelligent. We'll assume that almost everyone on this planet is intelligent enough, verbal enough, that they would say in their own language, yes, 2 and 2 is 4. But you could take it as being the absolute minimum benchmark that someone is sane, that they have some kind of balance and can operate in an adequate, profitable manner in life. And yet the only reason that the mind operates in that way is under duress. It's just not looked at that way. Because if I were to take another view, if I were to take ordinary intelligence's view, it would say, well, that's foolish to say that, because what you're calling duress is simply logic. What you're calling is reason. And it's true. But you think logic and reason is not duressful? Don't everybody bother to look that up, the word. You think that is not duressful? All right, on with the show. We're about to still tramp around in that jungle that we were naming for the time being regarding the secondary world, of how in the secondary world only that which is uncertain is alive. And there was a Kyroots very recently, last night or so, last time I guess, that didn't get much of a reaction, and so I'm going to pull it out. It said that one guy said, the Kyroots said, that one guy said he would truly know, or he would know that the end was truly near, if the real drifters ever showed up for a show. Now, Kyroots perhaps slipped and went a generation too far, but I can pull it down. The drifters were a big, hot singing group in the 50s. This is nothing new in this part of the world. The Ink Spots were a big group back in the 40s, and they went through it. And they're going through it that I'm talking about, and then the Platters are going through it. I was trying to bring it more up to date. Last time I heard, maybe more of your generations, I think it was Led Zeppelin. Is there some guys out, is the point, that's booking themselves as Led Zeppelin. And this whole thing starts like the Drifters was originally 5 guys. And but now they're all dead, or they're all gone off on their own. And so it slowly got down to, at one time there was maybe one of them that was part of the original. By then, they're an oldies act, you understand. They don't have a recording contract. Nobody really knows, but they advertise tonight. The original Drifters in person is now at some joint on the corner that the cover charge is $1. And you think, if you're interested in such, you think, boy, what a treat. You follow? It is to the point that there is, as far as I know, to use the example, there are no, and there are several groups traveling around, at least, that going by the name the Drifters. Now let's assume for whatever reason, maybe you are now of a generation which, see, this does not ruin, this does not distract from what you could have extracted from it, that even if you do not know who the Drifters were, now I got you up to date that they were a popular act. So you might just be sitting around with nothing to do, or you're driving down the street and it says, in person tonight, the original Drifters, and you see a lot of cars, and it says $1 cover charge, and you got nothing else to do, and you might think, well, I don't know what it is, or it might say something like, Stars of the 50s, the original Drifters. You might think, well, I like some of that stuff. The Drifters, it's a group, it might be kind of doo-wop music. It's not my generation, but what the hell, I'll go in. So let's say you go in. You don't know whether it's the original Drifters or not. You do not know. Maybe you go in and it's a good act. Now, may I suggest to you what was hidden behind that amounts to this, that the whole idea that the Drifters are still out there. And you do follow me, take my word. There's nobody left of the original Drifters in any shape or form in there. But they've got the name. Somebody does. This exemplifies the typical secondary uncertainties. In that, the name's the same, the Drifters. In certain areas, it carries the same appeal. It has a certain value. People will book these 5 guys in some little clubs. An agent calls them and says, hey, the Drifters are having to be coming to town. They're driving down from Chattanooga to Pensacola, and they'll be close to Birmingham, and I can get them for you cheap. I just happened to think about it, and they got a night off. The Drifters. And you go, well, all right. And cheap. So, but they still have some value. The name has some value. You follow? That the name is still existing. And to exist, of course, water can't exist without a fish and vice versa. You can't be dipped unless somebody's going to dip you. So the Drifters do not just exist that suddenly 5 guys go, by God, we're going to be the Drifters. I don't care if they don't exist. They can try it, but if they say, we're the Drifters, and the rest of the world, everybody else on the dance floor goes, it doesn't matter whether they're original Drifters or not. They're gone. They're forgotten. But notice, let's go ahead and assume that I am still using a viable example going on today. The Drifters, the name, still exists. And I'm saying exists on the basis that someone dances with the name. That they will be booked, their name appears on a marquee, and people will show up. So the name still exists as an entity, as something alive and meaningful. It has value to it. It has attraction. People will go and pay to see, quote, the Drifters. And yet what do you say once you realize, since I pointed out, that the act, that is the Drifters, the act, the entity, the agency of the Drifters, what is there, this act, bears no physical, tangible resemblance, has no connection to the original group. And yet, I start stretching fast without me having to do it for you. And yet people do not demand their money back. And should we get away from the nightclub scene? Present Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, Royalists, Republicans, the rich, the famous, do they ask for a refund on the basis of what seemed to happen? If that wasn't clear enough, let's try it like this. The humans individually the humans in general at the individual level. Once they realize, each individual, once they realize that they're not the original drifters, that is, once the individual realizes, hey, I'm not what I was advertised to be, which all of you have had that sensation, or you wouldn't be interested in such as this, and you're not alone, the world's full of them, doing other things, pursuing other hobbies. But in general, just right down the middle of the bell curve of sane, ordinary people, there comes a time that in a quite real sense, people realize that they're not what they were advertised to be. And if they could look at it a certain way, they would not even take responsibility that, oh, I didn't tell myself to advertise that way. Ordinary people can't do that. They feel like they do, which is just one short step to a psychiatrist's office or a priest or somebody, because you feel like, well, it's my fault. Well, of course, it's not my fault. It's my parents' fault. You know, because they got me all distracted. My father said, oh, you're going to grow up to be a football player instead of a hairdresser. What's wrong with you? And it got me all confused. The time comes in general that an individual realizes, I am not the original drifters. I am not what I was advertised to be, what I took me to be, what I have for years, whether it be for 20 or 30. For years I drove past me and I would look and I'd think, what of me? What of me? Here it is, I'm appearing tonight, the original me. And at least at one time the realization comes upon this poor consumer, to wit, you, that wait a minute, I am not as I was advertised. But do people demand reimbursement? Which I sort of wish I hadn't asked it that way, because I'm inclined to go off with that, and I didn't want to. Because in certain ways people do. But it's not really of any great interest, because it's just still the matter of the irritating uncertainty of life, because those who really demand their money back, the ultimate of it, the only thing you can do with the ordinary level is to try and balance out your weight by, if you recall, maybe putting just several grams of lead in your ear with a, maybe a 38 or even a close range of 25 automatic will do. You can't demand your money back. All you can do is press on with a hobby, and anything this side of actually demanding reimbursement, that I am not the original drifters. I am not as I was advertised to be. I know I say that, I assume you translate it into people have this sensation at least once, that I'm not what I thought I was. Things are just not working out. Things are just not, my plans are not running at full speed straight ahead. I am not what I was advertised to be. I'm not what I took me to be. But then the question again that I started out with, the original drifters, groups all over the place, more than several. Other groups doing this. Now let me refresh your memory. There is no such thing as the original drifters. They're either all dead or somewhere else. The ink spots are still around. And I know for a fact they're not just missing and in some other group. All of them are dead. There is not. Their generation's gone, and yet their groups, they're advertised. One of them plays Vegas constantly. I was in one of the small rooms. The original ink spots. And if you had just any kind of passing knowledge of musical history, even if you didn't like it, if you just well read in that area, you'd be aware of the fact, wait a minute, the original ink spots had records. My father used to have 78s, or my grandfather, and those guys, they were singing and they were popular in the late 30s. And you could look and say, wait a minute, most of those guys are no older than I am. Something's wrong. Does it stop it? Now, I went from that to one, and I'll assume anybody that sees this on tape, you have got to realize there is no mean spirit to this, there's no criticism. I picked out religion, amongst other things, and politics, but religion would seem to be the obvious one to start with, to get you to look at it in a certain way. And it doesn't have anything to do with a particular religion, but look at what religion promises, what psychology is, everything in the secondary world, what it promises, what it advertises to be. Every religion, all the social sciences, all the serious hobbies as they appear to be in the secondary world. From a certain view, you show up. Well, let's take Christianity, just for one. Don't you see that there is some connection between the ink spots, that they were popular and they were having big hits in the mid-30s. And if you took your best shot that, well, maybe the whole group wasn't over 25, then a little arithmetic will tell you that they're probably all worm meat by now. It would tell you this, your own little mind, if you were sitting there watching the original link spots in Vegas, and the oldest guy up there was obviously no more than 40, even you, even people of limit, we would all go, wait a minute, something's funny. Look at all religions. Look at what they advertise to be. The original, fill it in, any religion. And it's not. You show up, and it's not. Does anybody demand their money back? Does anybody go, wait a minute, I have been canarded. Don't look that up either. I have been fooled again. Wait a minute, this is not the original drifters. I'm no idiot. And it's not just religion, as always, or as often the case. I continue to assume that catches most people's attention and give them a hook to start on, but everything else. Someone who believes that if they were more interested in politics than the body of religious. Those who believe what we need is to revive the monarchies. I'm a royalist. And if you tried to dig up any past group, the royalists or the drifters, it is not going to be the original royalist. Well, contrary, I'm not a royalist when it comes to those kind of external affairs that control our social, political, and economic life. I am, in fact, a free-thinking, free market, may I say, within civilized boundaries, a certain kind of revolutionist. Except you dig it up, and it's not the original. But also, contrary, without going off into it, do you understand, you get a glimpse of why history is so popular? Because history is impossible. Why is anything in the secondary world interesting and intriguing to the ordinary mind when it seems to be in areas that any individual mind would consider important? It's up to you, speaking generically, but if somebody says religion is, or somebody says politics is, or someone says, well, just the human experience, learning from history, studying what has gone before, all of that, insofar as a certain kind of real neural subversive view, all of that is a faux show. They're advertising the original drifters, and it's not possible, or the original link spots. It is literally not possible. If it's history, it's not the original drifters. Do you follow? No matter what it is. And we're talking about ideas. You understand? We're not talking about the original link spots. They're dead. Even their clothes are probably rotted by now in the casket. It's the idea. Do you go and pay to see the ink spots? Well, yeah, I thought I did, or the drifters. I always heard my father talk about the ink spots. And here I am in Vegas, and I'm down to almost no money. At least the room they're playing in, you get in free over here on the side lounge. So, my father used to, he just swore that they were the greatest singing group in the world. So, are you going to see a singing group, or are you going because of an idea? In the secondary world, the answer is the latter. It certainly has its physical manifestations. It has a representation that here they come, the ink spots, but I'm already pointing out to you, they are not the ink spots. But who's going to say they're not the ink spots? The people that booked them in, to pay them whatever amount of money, the Aladdin Hotel, guy's named Vito. I'm not going to tell him, hey, that ain't them. No, he paid good money. He don't know. How about the people sitting there and going, hey, I like that. And you say, wait a minute, those are not the ink spots. You are asking for trouble. How about stand up in a church or a synagogue or a university and say, wait a minute. You keep saying this is the original ink spots, and it's not. It can't be. It does not happen. Well, of course, those little times it happens, you do understand, are absolute anomalies, and it's not the sane, healthy part of life. Just little pimples, little people here and there that life pops up that try to holler out that the drifters have no clothes on. Figure it out yourself. Although The ordinary mind is absolutely wired up and programmed to say that what it seeks is certainty and conclusiveness in everything from religion and psychology to particle physics. In point of operational fact, it remains uncertainty that drives and it furnishes all of man's unique secondary world, which again is one of those constant, beautiful arrangements of polarized energy, binary energy running a three-dimensional machine. And they're correct from their view. If I tried to tell ordinary humanity, if we took them all as being just one village speaking one voice, and I said, well, everyone believes that what you're after is some kind of certainty. They would probably, being the intelligent lot they are, they would probably be almost loath to answer. I mean, it's so silly. Well, certainly that's what we see. Those that are of a more religious persuasion, even they, with no offense to their faith, they would say that it doesn't have anything to do with that, but we are seeking certainty. I'm seeking more certainty in my faith, in my rituals, and knowing that I'm getting closer to the gods. And psychology says, well, it's an inexact science. I know, it's almost an art. We're striving to make it a discipline. But what we want is certainty, so we can help people, not just to say, well, I bet your problem is, probably subconscious. I'm getting ashamed to say that, says Dr. X. I wish we could be more certain. Of course, you get into science, and they would probably not even give us the time of day to say there's something other than you saying that you're seeking certainty. Science, that's not true. And yet it is true. But the mind is wired up to say that's what it's seeking, which it is trying to seek, but it cannot seek it. It cannot find it. The seeking itself seems to be a kind of finding, but remember, the discovery is also a form of invention. That is, it never reaches a conclusion, and if it does, then that one area is cauterized. It's forgotten. I mean, we've settled that. That which is certain is no longer alive. It's no longer an area of any interest. No one's pursuing it. It is not transforming and transferring energy. If I may suggest, this brings up another interesting area. That notwithstanding any kind of real crude, meaningless questions of ordinary relative morality, because I'm not speaking of that, but beyond what ordinary people would immediately want to place near what I'm about to say, they would want to place it within a context of some morality. Just note that in general, life condemns habit. And I don't mean just from any particular religious or social system of any particular habit. Not excluding and not specifically referring to what we were mentioning earlier, the non-legitimate habits in a sense. That is, hobbies, interests that individuals may have for which life punishes them. We're not talking about that. That's something else. I mean, that's obvious. You should know by now. If life is punishing you for the hobby, such as drinking, drugs, there's nothing else to say. That is not the wide concept of habit that I was trying to point to, or I'm about to. But life generally condemns habit, and not just physical addictions, not just smoking and drinking, etc. Although that, as you well know, to the point that it becomes almost cultural crusades here in our last 5 or 10 years. The cyclical onslaughts against drinking and driving and smoking. But even before the great European discovery of tobacco, even before our forefathers and foresoreheads invented alcohol, and throughout it all, without it just being a specific reference to some addictive physical habit, notice you get into areas that would seem to be more intellectual, oftentimes referred to as more spiritual, and even psychological. Life in general condemns habit, because if we went as far as we, somewhat astray from physical habits, alcohol and drugs, and went away from religion, and went into a humanistic area, the office of a psychiatrist. They may not use the word every day with a patient. They may not use it every time that they're diagnosing. But what is psychiatry? A form of religion, and et cetera, another institution. But what is one of its attitudes, if it could be summed up, about what your problem is? Forget the specifics. The general is habit. If a person says, my brain hurts when I do this. I've done this joke enough. And the psychiatrist wants to say, if his training would allow him, he'd want to say, hey, man, why don't you quit doing that? Which is too crude, too direct. But they are saying it's a condemnation of habit. If somebody says, I have bad dreams, the cure is, well, stop. I'm all the time, my mind is always bothering me because many times a day I dream of strangling my mother. From one view, you'd say, well, that's simple to cure. Don't, stop thinking about that. It's the habit. Because if it happened one time, would life condemn it? If it happened one time, would a person even notice it? They might notice they had a daydream suddenly killing their mother, but if it happened one time and never again, would you expect a reasonably stable, sane, ordinary person to be in confession or the psychiatrist's office feeling as though he is suffering some ill? It has to become habit. Many of the apparent would-be kinds of mystical systems and throughout the ages, you'll find it forever that there is some kind of condemnation of habit. All kinds of rituals, all kinds of attempted meditations, exercises, and in their own way it always gets back to the same thing of attempting to interfere, to break the patterns of habit in life. That in some way if we could break the shell of habit, perhaps our souls would soar and live with the gods, etc., etc. There is a general condemnation of habit. Not just on a moral basis, not just on something that's addictive, but just on habit. Do I have to make up examples forever? It's just you never think about it in this way. Parents are driven crazy by kids saying the same thing over and over. Now you can describe it all kinds of ways and say, well, it's annoying. Well, don't. What it is habit. Yeah, but the kids ask me why the sky is blue, and he's asked me that, I lost count. But in the last 2 weeks, he must have asked me that, 1,000 times. You can say, well, that's repetition. It's habit. If you don't believe it, just rhetorically, look at the word. If you want to see where repetition came from, just look at habit. You figure it out. Life generally condemns habit. We don't have time to do any more examples, so I will say life generally condemns habit, dash, why? All right? The second law. We had the number one last time. The second pertinent law, or Perkel law. All habits represent a failure of uncertainty. That, I suggest to you, is the beginning and the end of why life, through all of its agents, through all of its institutions, through all of its psychology, philosophy, you can't escape it. All the way to just interpersonal relations between family members and friends. There is a condemnation. I'm not trying to be dramatic. You can call it irritation. There is a resistance. There is an annoyance. But it is a general blanket coming from life. It can be explained in variations coming out of the individual. But there is a condemnation, a disapproval of habit in the secondary world. Remember that. Remember, we're talking about the secondary, not the primary. Contraire. You try and escape being habitual at the primary level, and life will take a different attitude. Life will cut you off like Richard Petty half drunk. Whatever that meant. Cut you off like, I got it. Life will cut you off like Richard Petty, about half drunk and acting as a lawyer at the pass. Figure that one out. At any rate, we're talking about the secondary world. We're talking about the singular world of man, that which springs irreversibly, inescapably, in any other way from the primary world. But then once it is here, we're talking about the secondary world, and here, habit represents one thing. It's why it's condemned. It was the second law I was giving you. It represents a failure of uncertainty. And I can give you the classic, if you want a sub-saw under the second law of uncertainty. The kind of little dance goes like a man will take up something new, a new interest, a new hobby. And of course, it may entail something physical. We've all got that by now. Stamp collecting, woodworking. But as long as it's not one of the three S's, as long as it's not strictly primary, then it's in some way a secondary pursuit. It is in some way a kind of secondary invention. It is a hobby. Nothing wrong with it. But a man takes up a new pursuit, a new interest. And at first, it being new, he is what? Uncertain. I'm not sure how to work a lathe. I'm not sure which stamps should I pay this much for a stamp? But then as he begins to kind of get the hang of it, it starts to become automatic. And then, once it starts to become mechanical, life begins to disapprove. And not necessarily in ways that someone comes up and condemns you from an external source of saying, my God, you're running your life collecting stamps. Of course, that can happen with fairly ordinary people. I don't mean that is some proof of what I'm saying, but those around the person may go, Jesus, Fred, the older you get, it seems like you spend all your time there in your den with your nose in that stamp book. Life is passing you by. You were to come outside, get some sunshine. You were to come out of the one particular area where you're habitual here, you kind of loosen up. You're dying. Age is beginning to do to your mind what it has been doing to your muscles. Life, in ways subtle or otherwise, once things become, and I'm using mechanical and automatic just in a shorthand sense, whatever your activity is, whatever any particular hobby or interest you may have had that you wanted to think of, once it reaches the point that you're no longer uncertain in general. That is, this seems to be what I do. I don't know whether I get rich, but in my spare time I sit around and I play the zither and I'm trying to write the world's first zither symphony. Or I don't know whether I'll ever get published, but I continue to work on my novel. When it's reached the point that there is not a kind of uncertainty, then the joie de vivre of it, the excitement, is gone. Surely all of you know that. I'm not trying to give you the blues. But most of you are old enough and pursued hobbies. Some of you I know for a fact. Forget that. You know it for a fact. For a while you were really working on the guitar, really working on your book, and now you may still say you do, but it's almost just mechanical talk itself, whether you do or not. If somebody says, you're still working on that novel you told me about back in college, it's been 7 or 8 years ago, but you had this great idea. You go, oh yeah. You say, well, did you ever finish it? You can fill it in, can't you? You go, well, as a matter of fact, I did finish the first draft, and then I threw the son of a bitch away. I decided, got to do it over. And the truth is, once it's brought up, you might not want to say it to the person, but it's like, I don't know, I lost interest. Maybe I'm never going to get published. Or I don't know, I got other things to do. I got married. Whatever it is. The point is this kind of what I mean by the uncertainty that is the absolute minimum requirement for life in the secondary world, once that uncertainty is gone, life disapproves. And the person feels it on the basis of a lack of excitement, a lack of joy. Boy, my hormones are getting old. I've never let Kyroot or had him point out yet, but the secondary world, the brain also is affected by the harmonies. Amidst the lightning and the goo, you still got some hormonal action going on, which is reflected literally, operationally, in what I'm calling uncertainty. Because when hormones are alive, there's a kind of uncertainty even at the primary level. Will I get laid tonight or not? Will that good-looking woman, is there any chance that she'd go for a dog like me? Just for one night, maybe just, a few minutes. Will I be able to pounce upon that cornstalk before it sees me and rip off an ear and eat? The older one gets, at the sequential city level, the less uncertain one is, which is part of every generation's complaint in general toward the older one. Especially when you reach a certain age, if you're ordinary, and then your parents and people of that generation, they just become almost caricatures ordinarily themselves. People with the popular term tunnel vision, you expect to look under it and find the picture of everybody that's at least 20 years older than you once you hit about 40. People have no interest in anything, the ordinary people. I'm 60, the guy says. Or he doesn't say it this way, but his hormones and his life says it. Hey, I'm 60. Leave me alone. That's it. Yeah, I'm 60. Get screwed. Take a walk. Yeah, I'm 60. Whatever it is you got to say, save it. That's it. And of course, this apparently happens between people, but all we're interested in, the whole purpose of this is for a few individuals here and there, is in you, because it's the same thing. There was a further Kyroots. It was last time also. We got 3 minutes to put it together. The Kyroots said that while they were struggling and straining for a better position, they created a better position. And this is, I was going to say, when life has men, through all time, through all cultures, they have men encouraging themselves and others to press on. Don't give up. You can make it if you try. Which, nothing wrong, it all sounds fine, but you see how that is connected to man being driven, if he were driven at an optimum level, an individual, is that he never falls into habit to the point that the excitement is gone. That he never falls into habit to the point that life begins to disapprove. If you are struggling with the normal uncertainties, and even if you continue to struggle, and even if an apparent specific goal is not met, just the actual wrestling with the fresh uncertainties will always produce something new. Which, running out of time, I've already done it sort of obliquely in the last several nights. Very often in the ordinary world of what appears to be discoveries and improvements in technology, the accidentals. The B.F. Goodrich's knocking over a vial on the floor and it turns into rubber. I won't say that. Or Alexander Graham Bell accidentally inventing the bath so that we could all be in it so when the phone rang. Well, it's something like that. That there seems to be a constant appearance of the sister's serendipity that things just seem to happen all the time. That a king, a warrior, to get on a real crude level, is apparently faced with overwhelming odds and doesn't know what to do, and it's like with his final breath, or he's been up for days fighting, and he goes, screw it, let's go. And they all just take off, and it's like something accidentally, or something unexpected happens. That is part of me saying that life encourages, through man, to himself and each other, this constant, press on, keep going. It does it in religion, does it in psychology, it does it amongst friends at a quite personal level. Because it is, in the secondary world, the uncertainties. Once you don't fall into the kind of habit, once you do not fall into the kind of failure of uncertainty that age normally brings, that's why every generation finally gets cut down and you go join the great ink spots in the sky, or the other way, whatever. It is an encouragement to push on, because as long as you're straining for a new position, something will come of it. It may not apparently have any benefit to you, which in the city, boy, does that come as a big shock. It's true at the ordinary level, and it's true in a particular way with a newer revolutionist. It's ordinary people. The ordinary mind finds, let's say, a useless task, or one that strikes a person that this is going to be absolutely a useless undertaking. It's going to be a thankless task. The ordinary mind would find that to be what, at the very least? Useless and thankless?